Hello, and welcome to episode 108 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with David Fraser Hidalgo, Delegate of District 15 in Montgomery County, Maryland, who is also the Vice Chair of the Montgomery County Delegation, Chair of the Hydraulic Fracturing Work Group, and Principal in an environmental consulting firm. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Jordan. How are you?
Excellent. The first question I'd like to pose to you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. So for those that don't know, and that's probably most of the people, I'm a former Montgomery County police officer, so I did a lot to advance public interest as a police officer in the state of Maryland. On my work group, which is environment and transportation, I deal with environmental issues every day, transportation issues every day. A couple of years ago, we passed a fracking moratorium in the state of Maryland, which was designed simply to put off potential hydraulic fracturing in the state of Maryland until we could have a better idea of what the public health and public safety implications of that was. That's a work group that I'm working on right now, and I mean the list could go on and on. I also passed a bill last year that dealt with underage drinking parties. We had a couple of kids in my district, in District 15, that were killed in a car accident, and the driver was a drunk driver that had been served by a parent in an underage drinking party. I guess that parent seemed to think it was a good idea to allow a bunch of 18-year-old kids to come and drink at his house. They got drunk, drove off, and 2 people were killed. So that bill really, basically that bill just allows for jail time for the parents of the thing to think that that's a good idea. Before this, they couldn't go to jail. Now when I passed my bill last year, now they can go to jail.
And have there been any effects of that bill? Have you seen a diminishment in the number of teenage deaths due to related to alcohol?
I think it's too soon to tell at the moment. The bill just turned into law on October 1 of 2016. So it has just been a few months, but it does put parents and teachers, principals, police officers, law enforcement, prosecutors in the position of being able to say something today that they weren't able to say just last year, which is if you host an underage drinking party at your house, there's a potential if someone gets hurt or killed for you to go to jail, and that's a big game changer. In the case that I mentioned before, you just, basically had a dad that went into court and wrote a check for $5,000, which is basically $2,500 per instance for the kids that were killed, and that was the end of it. And now, of course, there's the potential for that individual to go to jail, and for those people that have a significant amount of disposable income, the idea of being able to pay your way out of jail versus actually going to jail are 2 completely different things. So I'm optimistic.
Excellent. Well, protecting children's health is definitely important. You also spoke about a hydraulic fracturing moratorium, during which time there was a study to determine the impact on public health of actually the process of fracturing to extract natural gases. Now, have there been any results to that study after its conclusion?
Yeah, actually, we are presenting our findings, the work group's findings, to the full committee in a briefing next week, and so then the findings will be completely public by that point. I mean, in essence, the snapshot of it is that we, interviewed and discussed the positions of not only the oil companies and what technologies they're currently using and what they anticipate using in the near future. And we spoke with public health officials of some studies that were done at a Johns Hopkins University. We also spoke with fire rescue personnel on how they deal with spills and environmental issues. We spoke with environmentalists. We went out to Western Maryland, where the Marcellus shale play is, and it's most likely if there's going to be some fracturing done for natural gas in Maryland, that's the first place it would probably be at in Garrett and Allegheny counties. So we went out there. I've been out there 3 times. And I'll leave it at this. There are a lot of concerns for me specifically, and others that were not completely allayed by the research and the work that we did.
For those of our listeners who don't know, can you explain what the hydraulic fracturing process is, why someone would want to do it, and why there may be opponents to the process?
Sure. So hydraulic fracturing is, it's similar to kind of thinking about drilling for oil. You drill a hole, usually about a mile down, and then It's horizontal fracturing because they go sideways, so they can go under people's houses. They can go a couple of miles out horizontally. And then they pump really high-pressured water into that hole, and that's usually about 5 million gallons, more or less, per drill well site. And in that water is a mixture of sand and over 500-600 different other chemicals that are like drill bit rust inhibitors and lubricants for the drill bit and to get through all the shale. Mm-hmm. And they put that under an extraordinary amount of pressure, and then it cracks open the shale. In this case, it would be the Marcellus shale, but it's all over the country. It cracks open. It makes little micro cracks in the rock, and then the water and the sand go in there, and those little sand particles hold those cracks open, and it releases natural gas. And the natural gas is then taken out of that drill well, and it's taken anywhere around the country. And in some cases, actually, it's going to be shipped out of the country and used to heat people's homes or drive buses or things along that nature. And the advantage of it, of course, is it's kind of brought down the cost of combustible fuels like gas and oil specifically for heating homes. It's been very helpful in doing that. But the downside, of course, is that at 5 million gallons to do one well site, that's a lot of clean, good drinking water, and good clean drinking water is a finite resource. The process has been known to cause some earthquakes, as well as injection wells have been causing some earthquakes around the country, which most people have probably heard of. The truck trips on some of these small country roads where this gas is in these mountain areas, those truck trips can, be 2, 3, 4, 500 trucks just to do one well. That's a lot of diesel fuel, a lot of diesel fumes, and out of those 5 million gallons that are put in the ground to frack a well, about 2.5 million gallons come back out and they get put on a truck. That stuff is, coming from deep in the ground. It's radioactive. It's filled with all kinds of byproducts and chemical waste. And so that's being, that's going on trucks and is going on our roadways.
And where is that disposed?
Yeah, and that we have to dispose of it, and that's what some of the injection wells or evaporating ponds are, which are very dangerous. Just transporting it, you don't require hazmat material placards on the trucks because the feds don't consider it hazardous, although some of it's radioactive and is very hazardous. And so, public health officials don't exactly know if there's a truck that's been tipped over or that crashes and is spilling this stuff out into a lake or a pond or a water stream or anything. They don't always know what's in those trucks.
And is there a danger of the underground mixture of water and sand infiltrating natural ground well water sources that could therefore contaminate local potable water sources for the community above those sites?
Yeah, that's a big issue as well. I mean, that hasn't been as easily proven because everything is going on, hundreds and hundreds of feet under the ground. But there have been cases where that's happened. It's a little bit harder to prove because, people will say, some of the fracking companies have said, well, that wasn't what happened underground, but we had a truck that leaked fluid and it went into somebody's yard or it went into somebody's well or something. But yeah, there have been a lot of claims that is exactly what has happened. The more well-documented ones are all the other issues I mentioned, but all of these are issues, and there's a couple of documentaries that some of your listeners have probably heard of, in which you basically light on fire the natural gas or the methane that's coming out of your faucet from your kitchen, because in some cases their drinking wells have been compromised via just poking a hole in it or natural gas leaking in it from a fracking well.
So it sounds like the benefits of fracking are that it leads to cheaper fuel. It's basically an energy issue, and it leads to potentially somewhat cleaner carbon-based fuel than a coal or oil fuel. But on the other hand, there are potentially public health implications, negative implications, whereby fracking would potentially contaminate water sources, including potable water sources that would then have a detrimental effect on individuals' health who consume that water. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, and I think we have to ask ourselves as a community, as a society, are there other forms of generating energy that we can use that are not as harmful to ourselves and to the environment? And I think that clearly there are. There are a lot of other options that we need to move our economy and our energy generation toward. And it's just extremely concerning that we have such a need, particularly for natural gas, that we're willing to compromise our own drinking water, our own air via air pollution, our own groundwater wells and our aquifers, all in the pursuit of something that we can accomplish in other more sustainable ways.
Now, you are on the Environment and Transportation Committee, and there are such things as renewable portfolio standards across the state of Maryland set forth in the Maryland General Assembly, of which you are a part, that does require a proportion of the state's total energy generation portfolio to be composed of renewable sources. Can you speak a little bit about the renewable portfolio standards and how that is influencing this fracking debate?
Yeah, and that is a great point. I mean, it basically, again, this is to what I said before, we as a society or as a state need to decide, at what level we want to move to a sustainable source of energy, not only development and generation, but storage. And in our case, particularly on the energy development, we've reached certain milestones, and I think 2022 is our next milestone, where a certain percentage, which I think is 20%, has to be reached by 2022, purchased in the state of Maryland of clean renewable energy. In other words, not natural gas and coal. And we are ahead of pace in doing that. We're kind of one of the leaders in the country in doing that. And so the question is, do we want to increase that renewable portfolio standard? Again, renewable energy in our energy portfolio. And we passed a bill last year that increased it. I forget the exact number, but I think it's somewhere in the order of 30%, 35%. And the governor vetoed it. So, it's something that we have to decide as to, how important this is to us as a society, and whether we're going to override that veto and continue to push forward and be a leader in the country in looking at sustainable energy.
Did Governor Larry Hogan, who, by the way, for our listeners, is a Republican governor, and Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo is a Democratic delegate in a Democratic-controlled House and Senate in the Maryland General Assembly, did Governor Hogan provide an explanation for why he vetoed the increase in renewable portfolio standard 1 and 2? Are we actually on track to exceeding the current standard?
So your first question, yes. And my understanding when I originally read it, which was months ago, was that he was concerned that we were moving too quickly in that direction, and that there were going to be negative economic implications to the state for continuing to move at that pace. Where I have issues with that is that your second question is that we are ahead of pace. We are doing well. There are more solar panels going on roofs across the state than ever before, and solar panels are getting cheaper. So we're seeing more and more and more of that. There's a lot of energy efficiency that's come out of the last 8 years of the Obama administration. So we are doing better and better. And I just simply don't agree. So I think we will be overriding the governor's veto in the next, probably couple of weeks or so. And we'll just keep pushing forward.
Now, you're not only a delegate, correct? You are a principal in an environmental consulting firm. Can you speak a little bit about the work that you're doing to advance the public interest as a member of that firm, and how it meshes with your work in the state legislature? Right,
and that's a great question. And as a state legislator and a publicly elected official, I don't work on the work that I do with my company and my partners. We don't do really anything that has to do with state or local governments. So it's just to be right up there. We really keep ourselves at arm's length. Nothing that comes before our committee that's going to affect our businesses. I recuse myself of. I haven't had any of those issues to date. I don't anticipate having any, but to the point that I do, I will recuse myself. But essentially what my company does with another partner, actually Delegate Shane Robinson, is we look at businesses, small businesses, and try to help consult with them on how to create a more sustainable greener, if you will, the portfolio within their own company. In other words, how can they run their company in a more sustainably responsible way? And, that's essentially what we do, just try to help them to understand how they can, how they can think about the environment a little bit more, and how little changes that don't necessarily cost a lot of money can have big impacts. You can not only do the right thing, but you can tell your clients, you can tell your employees that you're doing the right thing and you're having a smaller carbon footprint. And at the same time, in most cases, you can save some money. You just have to get out of the paradigm of the thinking that has gotten us to where we are now and start thinking about other things. For example, in my home personally, I have changed all of my light bulbs from just regular incandescent. I moved some of them to CFLs, and now pretty much moved all of them to LEDs, and that's a huge saving. It's a huge savings in my electric bill, not to mention doing the right thing. But a lot of organizations and companies don't know that. They don't think about it. They don't think about the savings that can be garnered by just not having somebody every couple of months have to get on a ladder and change a light bulb. Right? You put these bulbs in, and then they last 20 years. So there are a lot of things like that. We help companies with.
Interesting. So it sounds like where you traditionally have business, and it seems as though Governor Larry Hogan believes that business is at odds with environmentalism and the environmental movement. It seems as though what you just described to us is that Governor Hogan believes that increasing the renewable portfolio standard will adversely impact jobs and job creation in the state of Maryland. But on the other hand, through your environmental consulting work in the private sector, it seems as though you're telling businesses, you know what? You can actually make long-term savings, and you can reduce your manpower needed to change light bulbs, and also reduce the amount of light bulbs that you actually need over a period of time, as an example of one of many ways a business could so-called green itself. And in so doing, that business would actually save money. So being environmental is a means of being profitable. How do you reconcile that kind of conclusion related to your consulting firm with the opposite conclusion reached by the governor of the state of Maryland?
I don't think that the governor either is being advised or knows how much has changed when it comes to environmental technology just over the last couple of years. I mean, the last 10 years, fine. The last 5, just the last 3 years. I mean, one of the bills that I have in this year is an electric vehicle tax credit for the state of Maryland. We had an electric vehicle tax credit. In other words, if you buy a vehicle of a certain battery density, then you get up to a $3,000 back from the state. So if you're buying, let's say, a $35,000 vehicle, you get a $7,500 federal tax credit, and then you have this one $3,000 from the state of Maryland. It's an oversubscribed plan. I have a bill in this year that will take that oversubscribed plan, which expires this year, and it doubles the fund, because the fund usually is oversubscribed and all the money's been spent out within 4 months of the fiscal year. So this will double it. And I think that's an example of how government can help. And it's unfortunate to me, I don't know if the governor is just not being advised, but electric vehicles are coming. Electric vehicles do not use gasoline. Electric vehicles lower the carbon footprint of the state, and that's one of the things that we need to do when we're looking at overall the renewable portfolio standard. And the solar that's going on across the state is amazing as well. And there are a lot of jobs. I mean, we are on record in the United States to have 1 million solar-related jobs in the next, I think, 2 years. China in that same period is going to have 13 million solar jobs. And if you take into consideration the population differences between the United States and China, it still doesn't account for 13 times more or 12 times more than what we have here in the United States. So there are a lot of jobs to be had, and I do think that something that happened in the last campaign when Hillary Clinton was asked about coal jobs, I think it's imperative to say, look, as far as the coal industry is concerned, we don't want to put people out and throw people out of their jobs. We want to change their jobs and make them cleaner and greener and better. I mean, would you rather be a mile underground in a coal mine? Or, when you don't know when that thing is going to collapse on you or what's going to happen? Or would you rather be outside, maybe surveying some land or being on a roof or a pole mount solar system. These are much greener, better jobs, and they have a future versus a coal job. And I think it's imperative, and that's a missed opportunity. I think it's imperative to say, look, we're not going to just, outlaw coal or minimize coal and have you lose your job. We're going to create opportunities for you to have a better paying job in a better and safer physical environment, and you're going to make more money. And it's unfortunate to me that the Hogan administration hasn't seemed to figure that out, but it's pretty clear to me. That's just one industry.
Before we transition away from the environmental issues we've been discussing, I just want to ask a final question. You just mentioned about your solar car tax credit. Now, it is true, clearly, that a significant proportion of power generated in Maryland and distributed to Marylanders comes from carbon-based sources. So if I were to have a solar car, though I wouldn't actually use gasoline to fill it up, I would use electricity that was generated, at least potentially, if we were to accept that we're meeting the 20% renewable portfolio standard, 80% of the electricity that I'm using was generated by a power plant that burned fossil fuels in the form of coal or oil or gas. So how do you reconcile that? Is that truly better to use electricity that is generated from carbon-based fuels as opposed to just using a carbon-based fuel in my own car? Are you really talking about economies of scale where you can contain the emissions in a power plant? What's the benefit there?
It is exactly. It's exactly what you just alluded to, and that is that, the difference between what you get out of the tailpipe and don't get out of the tailpipe versus what you get in a more controlled environment like a coal burning power plant. It's not clean. The coal burning power plant is not clean. But if you take into consideration the amount of electricity that's generated there versus what's put into your car, there really is little to. The difference is massive. And just to give you an example, currently based on current per gallon costs for fuel, at let's say $2.30 a gallon, you're looking at that same electricity to go that same distance is probably about 42 cents, something like that, in electrical costs. Not only that, but as every day goes by and more people put solar panels on their houses, and we talk about offshore wind, that's going to diversify that portfolio even more. So comparing apples to apples, yes, it is still much, much better, even though it comes from coal, because the electricity that's generated far outweighs what's used. So as far as the clean, as far as if you're comparing that to gasoline.
So we're approaching the end of the podcast episode at this time, and in light of that, I'd like to ask you a final question, which is to reflect upon your lifetime of public service to date. You have been a police officer. You have been very passionate about environmental issues. You are currently a delegate. You've done website development. You have been involved in many different areas of society and of the economy. Can you take a moment to reflect about the different ways in which you've contributed to public service and you've advanced the public interest, and speak about why you've done it and the legacy you hope to leave behind throughout the course of your career?
Sure. When I was growing up, it was very, very important to be involved in some level of community service. It wasn't always organized community service, but I remember growing up. We grew up in Wheaton, Maryland. My father was a federal employee. He worked for the National Labor Relations Board, and more often than not, myself or my brothers would bring home friends that were coming from broken homes. And I can't tell you on both hands how many times we had friends that just came and lived with us, whether it was for, a couple of nights as they were going through issues with their parents, just kids, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids, or, live with us for 6 months until they could get on their feet because of whatever happened with their parents. And so that always stuck with me, that you help people. There's a difference between, giving people a hand up and giving people a hand out. And it was, and from my dad's perspective and the way I was brought up, when people needed help, you helped them. That's just what you did. And you helped them to get up and on their own. And so that's always the way I've been. When I was a police officer, I did it to the best of my abilities. And as a delegate, moving to being a delegate, it's been very important to me to make sure that I make some kind of difference and make a positive impact. I mean, all of us are, we have to live on this earth. And when I look at my kids, I have a 7 and a 9-year-old kid, and one of my big objectives is just to make this world better than when I came into it, and make it a better, safer, cleaner, more open society where people are treated based on their abilities, not the color of their skin or their gender. That everybody should be treated equal, and everybody should have the same opportunities. And that's what I have strived for, and I will continue to strive for. And if I can just have some little impact, that's enough for me. And I feel like I've done that at this point. I have a lot more to do, but I would say that's the big piece. Whatever I can do to make my part of the world a little better place. When I was a police officer, it was Wheaton trying to make a better place. As a state delegate, I'm trying to make a better, safer place for the state for all the citizens of the 6 million people that live in Maryland.
So that has been Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo, the Vice Chair of the Montgomery County Delegation, Chair of the Hydraulic Fracturing Work Group, Principal in an environmental consulting firm, who speaks about his public service as a means of helping people when they're in a state of need, from his childhood where he was able to help where he was taught to help those who are in need, to ensuring that our world is around and is in great condition for our progeny, for future generations, through such concrete actions as offering up tax credits to incentivize the use of electronic vehicles, and to trying to address the issues of global warming. So, David, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jordan.
And this has been episode 108 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to visit www.publicinterestpodcast.com or visit us on iTunes with Apple products on the podcast app on your phone. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll